and one of the most incredible struggles for freedom that I have ever seen or read about. And that was the struggle of the Iranian people from U.S. domination through the Shah, which began when Mossadegh was overthrown in 1953, and for 25 years resulted in the exploitation of that country for foreign benefit. It was overthrown by nonviolent revolution, literally. Beginning in about 75 or 76, people started taking to the streets in massive numbers. In 77, I marched with them in 76. In 77, they could put 750,000 people out on the streets in Tehran, and they could put 1.5 million out all over the country. And finally in 78, weekend after weekend, they were putting several million people out on the streets, nonviolent revolutions. Young women would go up to military soldiers. They had a huge army, huge navy. They had more tanks than the British Army. They had Sidewinder missiles when only the United States had Sidewinder missiles. They were our chief surrogate in the region. And young women would go up to soldiers who were Iranians too, and they loved the rose there. Fez of Shiraz never failed in any poem to mention the rose, and they try to stick the long stem of the rose down the barrel of the rifle and say, "Why do you kill us? We're your sisters." And finally, after many deaths, in Jolly Square in August of 78, 2,500 people were killed by Huey helicopters, which were fabricated in Esfahan, the city of Haji Baba, fired on the crowds, many wearing burial shrouds, and killed 2,500. That was in August. But in January, the Shah fled. He killed as many as he dared that year, at least 25,000. And he realized that the people were going to prevail because they persevered, and they persevered without violence. And he left. Ayatollah Khomeini came back, and they struggled and are still struggling to achieve and assert their real independence. Since then, we've seen the horror of Syria. Right now, the most tragic at this moment. We saw military aggression against Iraq beginning in January of 1991, and chaos continuing and constant violence to this day. Country before the Iran-Iraq War, which was stimulated largely probably by the West. They haven't killed each other is the best method of all, isn't it? And one of the real tragedies, it killed 1 million young men, mostly Iranian. But from 1990 to 2003, the groups of us went there every year, carrying infant formula and things like that. UN sanctions, largely forced by the United States, we have to recognize these things, were genocidal. Genocidal sanctions by the United Nations, and everybody knew it. UNICEF reporting in as early as August of 1991 that 47,500 children under the age of 5 had died as a direct result of sanctions. In 1986, I guess it was, Leslie Stahl asked the Secretary of State of the United States, Madeleine Albright, as she's reading from a Food and Agriculture Organization, a UN agency report, 450,000 children under the age of 5 dead as a direct result of UN sanctions. And then she asked our Secretary of State, is the price worth it? Or she actually said, I guess she said, is the price worth it? Yeah. And Madeleine Albright turns to the camera and says, that's a very difficult question, but yes, we think the price is worth it. There's something terribly wrong with people that think the death of 450,000 children can be worth any price, you know.
I'm just going to hold it, Ramsey. Okay. Ramsey's a giant of a person, but I want to hold this one.
You are. You got 2,000. Thank you. I didn't realize that people couldn't hear. And what's happened to Iraq every day of every year since 1991 is beyond description in human terms. Constant fear, constant deprivation, dislocation of millions of people, a major part of the whole population, and unrelenting violence. Afghanistan is bad, and not quite as bad, but as long. And now Syria, beautiful Syria, historic Syria, prosperous Syria, being devastated. Deliberately by foreign design, backed by the powers that want to dominate the region. It's not that the others won't reemerge, but right now it's the last Arab state standing, really. Yes. And how it remains standing is a miracle because of the violence that has been fomented against it for no reason other than, in my opinion, the United States wants to dominate that whole region. And it's up to we the people. We share in the responsibility. We live here. We're citizens of this country. And we can change that. It's been going on for a lot longer than we like to admit. Historians in the crowd, and at least one pretty good historian in the crowd, could tell you about us raiding North Africa in the early 18th century even, and in the 19th century, in the 20th century. Our militarism now endangers life on Earth. We have, at this moment, 8 Trident II nuclear submarines on alert in the Pacific. Each has 140, and several have 144 nuclear warheads. There are only 2 calibers to choose from. It's not apples and oranges. It's 140 megatons or 144. They claim the smaller bomb will leave a crater 50 miles wide. You put a bomb down at the right location in this area, you can kill 25 million people with one bomb in the crater. You don't know what will happen to the firestorm or the wind blast and all outside of it, the radiation. And 140, collectively in this room, we couldn't think of 140 towns in China, could we? We'd have a hard time thinking of 140 in Europe, but you could take out either one, Europe or China, with one of those nuclear submarines. If that's not insanity, I don't know what is. I don't know how you could use one of the warheads, and yet we keep manufacturing more and more. Let's not let Syria be crushed. Let's remember its history and all that we owe it. Its beauty, its prosperity, its peace. Some might not have liked this government, some don't like our government. Not enough don't like our government. We need to change our government to make it a government of peace, and a government that cares about the poor, and a government that cares about the hungry and the homeless. But above all, we've got to stop American violence. And the only non-violent power that can do it is the American people. If the Iranians did it, we can do it. So let's do it. Thanks for being here.
The gentleman who will be presenting is Dr. Mazen Adi. He's a counselor.
Let me first thank Mrs. Ommani and Mr. Ommani and the AIFC for organizing this event. I know it's in a critical time, and I'm really glad that we are having this event here in this blessed place, church. You know, I'm coming from Syria. I'm coming from Syria, which is not in its best time now. I'm coming from the place where all civilization met. I'm coming from the place where all religion came. I know that all of you know that Syria is the home of Islam, Christianity, Judaism. Christianity started from Syria, and we still have St. Paul of Damascus buried in Syria. He's buried in the great Umayyad mosque now. Damascus was the capital of the first Islamic state in history, and most of the Syrian cities have a Jewish neighborhood.
I'm going to hold it.
I will do
sure?
that. Yeah, I'm good. And the Syria called all of the Jewish people, Jewish Syrian, the people of Musas. I have a written statement here, but I believe that I will be speaking without any written text here. I'll be speaking from the heart, because for me, I have been working at my mission for over 5 years, and almost 6 years, and I have been involved fully with the situation regarding Syria since the beginning of 2011. I believe all of you know what has been happening in my country. It is a trend that everybody has been saying about this word of Arab Spring. And I heard somebody yesterday, a very respectable official, saying that the Arab Spring is not a spring, it's Arab heat. It's an Arab summer, that its heat will reach everybody if we don't deal with that in a very rational way. Let me go back into the history of the crisis that happened in Syria. And at the beginning, we tend not to call it crisis. We wanted to call it a demand from the people of Syria for something that we think it was their right to ask the government for some kind of demands, and we labeled that as a legitimate demand. That's why we were at the beginning, a week after some kind of demonstrations, the government and the president put a basket of reform and promises for everybody, and they said that we will meet your demands. And the president started receiving people from all over Syria. Every day he would meet more than 200 people. He would meet everybody and take note of their demands. He thought at the beginning, and he was his pledge is to help all of these people. He is their president, and he want to help them. If they have a demand, he will fulfill that demand. So he took note of everybody's demand. Sometimes it would be personal, sometimes it would be public, but he took note of everything. He met a huge amount of people. They would come in buses, and he would gather them in a big halls and listen to every and each one of them. That was the belief at the beginning, that what we are having is people want to have something legitimate, and we are, as government, wanted to fulfill that because it was our duty. However, we were encountered by some people who wanted to implement their agenda and to take advantage of those demands in order to have their own agenda implemented in Syria. So that was when they started to some kind of let's say armed-related activities that would have some kind of effect on any peaceful move or any peaceful demand. This thing, the government wanted to contain that in a way, and it was little by little increased while the those demands were raised. The problem is some countries whom we thought that they are our brothers, some neighboring country who we open up with, they had a different agenda in their mind. The problem is, let me give you a little bit of background. We are the only Arab state that allows all Arabs to go into Syria without a visa, while other Arab states demand that the Syrians stay and wait for 15 days and more to get a visa if they grant this visa to this Syrian.
Into a time when imperialism is increasingly suffering because, of course, for many reasons, but not least because of the economic crisis. I've said before that the Venezuelan president Hugo Chavez has said that the latest wars, starting with Libya and Syria, is a new cycle of colonial wars to rejuvenate the global capitalist system, and I think that's exactly what we're seeing. And I don't need to explain to you how the Western corporate media works. The Western corporate media, of course, is there to represent Western corporate interests that run our democracies in the West. So the media at this time is becoming increasingly important to facilitate this new cycle of colonial wars. And of course, as Eleanor mentioned, I was in Libya last year and I visited Syria earlier this year in January. And there were so many parallels with Libya from a disinformation perspective. When I first arrived in Damascus, one of the first things that we did was to go to a ceremony in a church for the son of a Christian family called Sari Saud, who the Al Jazeera had said had been killed by the Syrian government. This is quite a famous case, one of the more famous cases of, the extremely shocking disinformation relating to Syria. But of course, Sari Saud's mother was later interviewed on Syrian TV, accusing Al Jazeera effectively of killing her son, because she confirmed that her son had been killed by armed gangs in Syria. So in the church there was a ceremony for her son, and there was also a ceremony for the son of the Grand Mufti of Syria. So the Muslim and Christian community got together in the church to, in a sign of unity, essentially, against this foreign-backed campaign that is destabilizing the country and is trying to target the unity that Dr. Adi described and the unity that they expressed in that church. And, of course, Libya is a very different country from Syria, but when I was in Tripoli, one of the things that obviously struck me there as well was it's a tribal country, was the strong level of unity between the people in the face of the NATO campaign to destabilize their country, as of course we can see that it has done today. And just going back quickly to the voices that are silent, such as Dr. Adi's and the many hundreds and thousands of Syrians whose voices are ignored in the Western corporate media. It doesn't matter how uncredible the Western corporate media's sources are. And the hypocrisy is really astonishing. Just today, for example, the Telegraph and many other Western corporate media outlets published a story that, of course, today is a year since the execution of the Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi. And of course, where we saw the images of him being tortured and then murdered broadcast across our screens. Today, the mainstream media published a story in relation to Libya saying that the former spokesman of Libya, Musa Ibrahim, had been arrested in Libya. And the source for this information was the current Libyan government. And it didn't say, if the Western corporate media was to use, for example, the former Libyan government or anybody who supported the former Libyan government as a source, or if it was to quote the current Syrian government, it would always say, when it uses them as a source of information, they claimed, allegedly. When it's a source that represents their interests or is carrying out their interests, it's always, the quotes from those sources are always repeated verbatim as fact. I can confirm that Musa Ibrahim has not been arrested today in Libya with 100% certainty. So I just wanted to use that opportunity to give that example, you know, because and of course the reason why they're doing that today, we have to ask, why are they doing that today? It's a year since Muammar Gaddafi was killed. A year ago today, the whole of the media and was in a euphoria about this illegal act, saying that Libya had been liberated. Of course, every day, with the information that comes out of Libya, we can see that the chaos that has been unleashed there. And this leads me on to, I don't want to ramble too much because, of course, there's, I'd rather we get to, you know, discussion and question and answers, but I just want to say that, make some more of the parallels between Libya and Syria. So the other parallels is that when I was in Syria, when I was there in January, it was probably very different to how it is today. Of course, you know, with every day of this campaign and billions of pounds worth of arms pouring into the country and fighters, it's obviously the situation is getting extremely, extremely dangerous and very, very disturbing. But when I was there, it was relatively safe in Damascus, for example. And there were many, many refugees in Damascus from areas that had already come under control by the rebels, particularly Homs at the time, because despite that the media was reporting that Homs was under a state of siege by the Syrian government, at that time there were many parts of Homs where it was impossible for a policeman to enter. And so in the hotel that I was staying in, there were many refugees that had been taken in by that hotel. And there was the same situation when I was in Libya before the former government was destroyed or exiled from the country, or however you want to look at it. There were thousands of refugees in Tripoli, and refugee camps had been set up in Tripoli for people that had fled from areas like Tawerga, Benghazi, Derna, and other areas. But the difference between Syria and Libya, of course, is that the destabilization of Libya happened almost in the blink of an eye, obviously for many reasons, not least because of the NATO airstrikes. And we saw in Iraq, and we see now in Libya today, that, and in every other instance, that the media acts like a pack of dogs, essentially. The disinformation that comes out of the media has, you know, in relation to Libya and Iraq, it went with full force up until the moment that the aim of the Western elite had been achieved, which is, of course, so-called regime change. As soon as those aims have been achieved, then the media begins changing its tune a little bit and covering its back. So now, 18 months ago, as Dr. Adi said in Syria, they've been saying for a long time that there are armed groups and Al-Qaeda operating in Syria, and they were laughed at when they initially said that. The same thing happened in relation to Libya. From the very first days of the crisis, the Libyan government said the same thing, and they were laughed at. Now, of course, we've had the assassination of the former US ambassador. Who are they pointing the finger at? Al-Qaeda. But in Syria, because the war, you know, the Western elite haven't been able to achieve their aims as they thought they would be able to in a short period of time, it's becoming very, very difficult for the media to cover its back. And to keep on perpetuating the lies, as of course, in Libya there was many people on the ground trying to release information about what was happening, but things simply happened so quickly it didn't have time to filter through. In Syria there's been efforts by many Syrians through Syrian TV, through YouTube, through the internet, to expose the lies of the media and to show what is really happening in their country. So we saw, for example, the expose of CNN's and other channels' use of this figure called Dani Abdul Dayem, and even CNN had to pick up on the fact that they had been exposed and tried to cover their back. So I think that the Western media has totally really lost any credibility, but the problem is that they're still continuing to portray what's happening, even though they're admitting essentially that there's armed groups in Syria, etc., they're still continuing to, there's certain red lines within Western thought, and which is why what Eleanor said just before I spoke about democracy is so relevant. Even if people in the West accept that everything that the Syrian government said is true, it's like this red line comes up. Oh, but Bashar al-Assad's been in power for so many years, he has to go. As if, that's any decision of ours to make whatsoever. And of course, that lie that has been propagated perpetuates the further lie, as you said, of the fact that at the beginning of the crisis, it wasn't as it was, as in Libya as well, it wasn't as it was portrayed as a part of the so-called, and I have a really big problem with the term Arab Spring as well, because Arab Spring isn't a term that any Arab came up with. No Arab that participated in the protest movement gave it that name. But anyway, just to wrap up, I was saying that the media is becoming more and more honest about what is happening in Syria and Libya. But what it's doing now is it's taking everything, as usual, it's taking everything out of context and separating it from how this all started. There's chaos unraveling in Syria, so there's armed groups in Syria, so there's a civil war breaking out in Libya. Oh, look, whose fault is this? Those backward Arabs, those backward Muslims. And today in the Telegraph, there was an article about the so-called Arab Spring, about Qaradawi, portraying him as the great friend of the West that actually he is proving to be. But anyway, so the last line of the article said, the Arab Spring, and of course for those of you who, I'm sure you're all familiar, the Telegraph is essentially the Conservative Party's mouthpiece in Britain, which is of course our ruling party. The article said, the Arab Spring has highlighted as ever before the deep divisions, injustices and clashes of ideology inherent within the Islamic world. Of course, this is a deeply racist statement, and it's essentially turning all the misfortune, its own misfortune, to its advantage by saying, oh, well, the Arab Spring, it didn't go our way, there's chaos. Of course, it has gone their way, you could argue. But we didn't back it, it's got nothing to do with us, or the reason why it didn't work has got nothing to do with us, it's because of those backward Arabs and Muslims. So this is the narrative now that we are seeing increasingly today, and it's a very dangerous narrative that, of course, is quite easy to feed into, actually, because of the way that proxies have been used in the region, and it's quite easy for us to say, oh, those people, they're so stupid, they're fighting against each other, but we have to always remember that all of the divisions and causes of the problems in that region are caused by decades and centuries of Western interference. And that is the message that always needs to be hammered home.
Since 1979, the United States, using economic, trade, diplomatic, political, and threats of war and invasion, has tried to keep Iran out of economic balance and isolated internationally. It began with one, arming Saddam Hussein of Iraq to invade Iran. That war continued for 8 years. It was a human catastrophe, waste, and economic damages to both countries. 2, used every occasion to impose sanctions against any company that formerly had investment in the oil, gas, and energy sector of Iran. 3, it broadened these sanctions to include selling parts to the machinery and the factories that Iran had previously purchased from the West, from the Europeans and the American companies. Therefore, they put sanctions on every company that facilitated financial lines or banking to pay for the parts. Number 4, blamed Iran for the resistance of every oppressed nation in the Middle East, especially the Palestinians, the Syrians, the Iraqis, and the Afghanis. Iran had to pay for that resistance, not only in terms of money, but in terms of sanctions. Further sanctions were imposed on Iran because they said they have an influence among the fighters in Iraq, because the Muslims fight. So that is why Iran has to be sanctioned. 5, the US has turned the Persian Gulf into the American lake, in which it brings every kind of warships. The biggest armada of warships the United States is showing every day and night and threatening Iran with them, that we're going to hit you if you still emphasize on your independence and progress. And if you continue supporting the national liberation struggles in the Middle East, you have to pay for it. Six, especially since 1979, the US has trained and armed terrorist groups around the world, but especially in the Middle East. Namely, Al-Qaeda is the product of the American foreign policy, and today is being used as a shadow army around the world. MKO or MEK, they have 10 names, and that is the Mujahideen Khalq, which has become a proxy group, armed group for the United States, especially in Afghanistan and Balochistan. 7, assassinated at least 5 Iranian scientists. Can you imagine a country that talks about democracy and human rights assassinates young people, average age of 30 to 35, because they studied physics and they're serving their country? 8. Confiscated Iranian sovereign funds in the very bastion of so-called the greatest democracy in the world, in the United States. Many accounts of individuals and companies, Iranian companies, has been seized and confiscated. The amount is humongous, as the children say. Billions and billions of dollars of sovereign funds of Iran has been taken over by the government of the United States, and they want Iran to pay for every American soldier or the Jewish civilian getting killed in the struggle with the Palestinians. 9, or I'll go to 10 then. Recently, the United States has announced that they're going to confiscate Iran's Alawi Foundation. Alawi Foundation was established by the Shah, helping American universities and children to go to school. And today, after this Alawi Foundation has spent billions of dollars helping American kids to go to school, they want to confiscate it because they say this helps the government of Iran. Forces whose objective is to overthrow the government of Iran and Syria are of two parts. One is the classical US imperialism with its allies and other partners like Saudi Arabia and Qatar. They are cooperating in order to overthrow the government of Iran and Saudi Arabia. But a recent phenomenon in the peace movement is that groups are taking insidious position with respect to Iran. They pretend that they are against the war in Iran. But at the very end, they say there is oppression inside Iran, and especially, please pay attention, they say that sanctions only hurts people, but strengthens the government of Iran and Syria. In other words, they are advising the United States employ other methods facing Iran. They say that sanctions weakens people of Iran, but strengthens the government of Iran. In other words, they are talking about to the American government that they should employ those methods that would not harm Iranian people, but would be able to overthrow the government of Iran. You should figure out to the very end where they stand in the entire composition of forces. Thank you. There is not much.
Larry Hales is the staff member of the International Action Center. He has been a staunch anti-racist, anti-imperialist fighter and defender for the rights of the working class and the oppressed. Larry has traveled to Palestine, to Libya, and Cuba in his efforts to oppose racism and the attacks of the United States against the people of Palestine. And he's also been very active on the campaign of the Cuban Five, freeing the Cuban Five, and freeing Mumia Abu Jamal.
I think it's important as we talk about, to observe, number one, that this is the 1-year anniversary of the murder, the lynching of the brother Muammar Gaddafi. But I think it's important to talk about where these wars actually come from, where they flow from. Imperialism, a lot of people talk about it, but it's important to understand, for us to understand, I think many of us here do, is that it's not a policy. It's not a policy of Barack Obama any more than it was a policy of George Bush or any of the other presidents that preceded them. It's an objective outgrowth of a capitalist system at a certain historical stage of development. That's what imperialism is. And we find, U.S. imperialism entered on the stage during first of all, capitalism itself, the foundation of which was the most naked, brutal aggression that the world has ever seen. It is not that it continues to be brutal now, it's just that the wars were more personal then. They were at the end of a knife versus somebody pressing a button and destroying a whole village and murdering people. So the wars are much more personal at that period in history, where people use smallpox blankets instead of weapons that could be lobbed with a weapon system that has poison within them. But U.S. imperialism at this particular stage of its development, because I want to not go over my 5 minutes that I have here, because you didn't come here to see me, is right now in this period of history, there is a very profound crisis of the capitalist system. See, capitalism itself needs to expand or die. And that process is where one of the most profound fundamental crises of the capitalist system comes from. And right now we have a system that has overproduced the means of production. It is overcapacity. So the crises of overproduction, which leads to war, which leads to layoffs and the suffering of workers, not just in the imperialist world, but primarily, majority of the suffering is much greater in the oppressed world. So this crisis that we're at now is a crisis that is brought on by the fact that the system has expanded and outreached the globe. It can't expand anymore. They've staved it off through the collapse of the Soviet Union, the opening up of India, the opening up of China. They've been able to stave off the great expansion of the credit system, but all of that is gone. They're not going to find any more spheres of influence so they can super exploit the people. It's not that they're not going to try. You see, the countries that are under attack now are being attacked because they dared exercise, even if it's just a shred of independence from U.S. imperialism. And that is a no-no within this global world order. What the U.S. wants is everyone to acquiesce to their capitalist class, because they think that it will get them out of their crisis. But look what happened with Iraq and Afghanistan, those brutal wars that murdered hundreds of thousands of people and continue on to this day. It has not saved them or brought them out of the crisis of their system. The weapon systems that at a time, other periods in history, that they can, the Pentagon spends billions of dollars of paying for weapon systems, that cannot get them out of the crisis, especially when these weapon systems are not built or not labor intensive, but it's technology from which they get built. So we have to understand that. We have to see that as the crisis deepens, because it's not going away, that the U.S. will become more aggressive. You see, a wild animal is at its most dangerous when it is wounded, because it feels that it's back against the wall and can't do anything else but fight to the death. And that is where U.S. imperialism, Western world imperialism, that's where they are today. I'm jumping around a little bit, excuse me, because I'm trying to I don't even know where I am within these 5 minutes. I remember I was in Libya in 2007. And I remember when the events actually started, there was the same propaganda that they're using now, that they've used against Syria. And there were unfortunately some people who would dare call themselves revolutionaries that think that it was a positive process that was developing in the world. And to those people, if any of them are here today, what say you now? What say you now when the entire country has been completely destroyed, and it had the most well-built infrastructure in all of Africa, and it has been completely destroyed? What say you now since the massacres of black Libyans and the rounding up of thousands of people put in prisons who have not seen their families and may never see the light of day? So what say you now? What positive has happened in Libya? And what positive could possibly happen in Syria? What is actually happening there? You have to look at no two rebellions are the same. You have to look at the social forces in motion. And the social forces in motion in Libya, just as they are in Syria, represent those who are fighting in the interest of the bankers and financial capitalists in the Western world and the US, which is predominant. They are fighting a war in their interests. And if they were to be successful, then the people of Syria will find themselves enslaved to the interests of US imperialism. So if you are a revolutionary internationalist, you see, I used to always judge somebody who said they were a revolutionary in this country by how you looked at the national question in this country and whether you supported self-determination. And on the international scene, you look at a person who calls himself a revolutionary by how they see the primary contradiction that exists in the world today. And that is simply between the imperialist world and the oppressed world. And so if you were to ask me which side am I on, I support the Syrian government against the rats that are doing the bidding of US imperialism. Just as I supported the government of Libya, just as I support the government of Iran that is fighting against the interests of US imperialism being spread into their country and a takeover of that country. That is how we have to judge a revolutionary. There is no time for mistakes right now. It's very crucial. You see, the same banking interests that want to take over these countries are the same banks that will foreclose on people around the country. The same bankers that want to privatize the public education system. So it's within our interest to fight against them and to fight against US imperialism and to support the governments around the world that are fighting, because their victory against US imperialism strengthens our hand. They are our allies and brothers and sisters in the struggle. We must support them, and we must stand strong and say down with US imperialism. All power to the people, and thank you.
I'd like to introduce the next person, Becker. Ben has been active here in the New York area, opposing every expression of US imperialism, Iraq war, Afghanistan war, the attacks on people, working people.
The Answer Coalition would like to thank all of the organizers and of course all of you today for joining in this critical discussion about the war in Syria, in addition to the political leaders and activists such as Ramsey Clark, who have been consistent organizers opposing the endless war machine. We've been joined, of course, by a panel of independent journalists who bring an eyewitness account of the conflict there. And we've also heard from the representatives of the Syrian embassy who have explained the conflict from their point of view. Their presence here especially is significant because as a precursor to every imperialist war, the US propaganda machine cranks out materials designed only to discredit and delegitimize the targeted entity, so that when it does finally speak, if it has any chance to speak at all, people's vision, people's understanding of that entity have already been colored by the disinformation campaign, so that they have no capacity to provide an alternative narrative to what is taking place and what the imperialist sort of media machine spits out. I'd just like to lay out what the Answer Coalition views as our principal orientation towards the Syrian war. Like all wars, of course, the Syrian war is loaded with lots of complexities and dimensions, social contradictions, class contradictions, ethnic contradictions, and what have you. In other words, this is a forest that has many, many trees. But in order to establish a correct orientation for the anti-war movement, it's necessary to take a step back, to put in sort of a global point of view what is taking place so that we can see the forest and not simply the many, many trees. When we step back, what do we see? We see that the US government, the Pentagon, the CIA, and its many regional allies and proxies in the Middle East have united to overthrow an independent, secular, nationalist government in the heart of the Arab world. The tactics employed in Syria are somewhat different, so far at least, from the tactics used by the United States and its partners to overthrow the secular nationalist government in Iraq, to overthrow the largely secular nationalist government in Libya, somewhat different from the tactics it is using today to try to overthrow the independent nationalist government that anchors the Islamic Republic of Iran, somewhat different from the tactics it has employed to try to overthrow the socialist government in Cuba and the independent revolutionary government in Venezuela, somewhat different from the tactics that it's employed when it invaded Panama in 1989 to overthrow a nationalist regime there, and Grenada, and Guatemala, and Iran before that. We could go through the list quite long. The tactics employed by the imperialists against Syria so far are distinctive, but it is our contention that the objectives of these powers in Syria are fundamentally the same as those pursued in those other interventions that I just mentioned. And once that comes into view, all the talk about freedom, protecting civilians, defending human rights, stopping terrorism, stopping the acquisition of nuclear technology or weapons of mass destruction, again, a list that goes on, we see that these are nothing more than popular slogans designed to conceal the intent and the objectives of the imperialist powers. Imperialism wants to overthrow the government of Syria and replace it with a new regime, not because they want Syrian people to enjoy more democracy or human rights, but because they want to place Syria directly in the camp of the West. And in that effort, in that war waged by the United States against the secular, independent, nationalist government, we believe it is the primary duty of the anti-war movement in the West, in the United States, to expose the lies and disinformation used by our own government and its spokespeople in the media to enlist the support, or at least the acquiescence, of poor and working people, oppressed communities here in the United States. Now we know that when we oppose imperialism and all of its tactics, war, sanctions, interventions, assassinations, CIA subversion, the funding of so-called human rights groups through the State Department, we know that the anti-war movement is going to be accused of becoming apologists for those who have been targeted for destruction. We know that those of us who are here in this room perhaps are facing a tremendous amount of pressure from people who have been infected by this sort of slanderous campaign. It's crucial that the anti-war movement remain firm rather than capitulate in the face of these demonization efforts. The Syrian civil war is, of course, a tragedy for the people of Syria. But if it were not for the outside intervention from the United States, from NATO, from Saudi Arabia, from Turkey, and others, the civil war would not exist today. We must continue to repeat that to our friends, our family members, our neighbors, our classmates. Now, there is a debate today, if we saw the presidential debates, within the summits of the U.S. ruling class about whether or not the U.S. should directly intervene to establish a no-fly zone in Syria. But this debate is purely tactical. Having been defeated in Iraq, but bogged down in Afghanistan, the U.S. ruling class is concerned about directly entering with its own military forces the war in Syria. Right now it prefers, it seems, to use Turkey and sort of NATO proxies as the agency to fuel the civil war. But make no mistake about it, the U.S. is already at war with Syria. It is providing military arms and coordination to the so-called rebels. It is coordinating with its NATO partner Turkey. It is imposing severe economic sanctions on Syria, and it is our belief that if the Syrian government does retain its ability to hold on to power, there will be growing pressure on the next administration, or even if Obama is re-elected, for a more direct military intervention into Syria. We, of course, favor a peaceful resolution to the Syrian conflict and recognize that there were many in the political opposition, as was mentioned, to the Asaad government who sought a negotiated political process that allowed for significant reform and change, but who opposed foreign intervention by the imperialists and their regional proxies. The Syrian government, too, we believe, is open to a political and negotiated settlement, and still is. In order for there to be peace again in Syria, however, it would be required that the Western imperialist powers, those who have fueled and promoted the civil war, change their orientation. The anti-war movement, that's where we come in the United States and Europe, must under these circumstances do everything in its power to arouse and mobilize public opinion in the United States and to expose the war makers for carrying out a policy that is in direct contradiction to the needs and aspirations of the Syrian people and poor and working people here. Ultimately, for there to be true peace in Syria, Syria must be free to be the masters of its own destiny, to exercise authentic and genuine self-determination, free from outside and particularly imperialist intervention. So that's my time. Again, I want to thank you all for being here and thank the organizers for standing up to a considerable amount of pressure themselves to hold a forum on this topic at such a critical time.
I'm an Occupy Wall Street activist, and I'm a member of Workers' World Party. And I just want to say there's been a very, very false media campaign to try and link the imperialist thugs who are destabilizing Syria and murdering civilians with the heroic demonstrations of Occupy Wall Street. And that is not the case. The people that are destabilizing and murdering people in Syria are in service of the banks and the corporations and the same forces that Occupy Wall Street is protesting against. And there is no equation between the imperialist thugs and the Occupy demonstrators. There are millions of youth in this country who have a burning hatred for the super rich and the 1% that are destroying the life for youth in this country, and they want to stand with the people of Syria, stand with the people of the world that are fighting against imperialism. And it may not be, there may be confusion on this issue, but I can assure you that anyone who is sincere is on the Syrian people's side on this issue.
The voices of Syria, or the voices of that you are not used to hear, is not heard, like the voices I'm representing. We have been in a fight with the media. The media, yes, we admit, we don't have a strong media. We are not we don't have a petrodollar. We don't have billions of dollars to spend on a satellite channel like Al Jazeera or Al Arabiya. We don't. We tried our best in our money to have 3 or 4 channels, satellite channels in Syria, some newspapers, some websites where we can deliver our message. In no time, actually, after the beginning of what they call the crisis in Syria, we were faced with as somebody said, that children use this word, humongous media campaign that we have against Syria. And there were over 35 channels, TV channels, directed to Syria. They played a very negative role. Apart from Al Jazeera and Al Arabiya, whom they started to, right from their inception, to gain the confidence of the Arab world that they are speaking in a neutral way. Actually, it was a step to put what they wanted to put, to implement what agenda they were asked to do, so they can have the audience. We were faced with some TV channels broadcasting from one of them from Saudi Arabia, where they have a clerk. He called himself Sheikh, but he's not Sheikh. Imagine you have a channel here in the United States where you have somebody saying, you know what, today I'm not gonna sleep without hearing the news that you killed 50 persons from this group or sect, no matter who they are. They can be children, because you can kill children, because children can get old and they will harm you. I want you to do that. He says so. It's not a secret, it's on YouTube. If you know Arabic, you can go and see it. It's on YouTube. I'm not going to say all of this, the media campaign that were against Syria. With this limited ability of delivering our voice, we were blocked. The Syrian TV channels who broadcast in Arabic, even in Arabic, you cannot see them here in the United States, not even in Europe. They were blocked. They are part of the sanctions. Not only this, the Arab satellite broke the contract with the Syrian TV channels. So the Arab world cannot listen or hear the Syrian point of view. It's only 3 channels as opposed to 50. And it's only in Arabic. And we are trying to say, this is our part of the story. So this is the problem. We have the Syrian Arab news agency. The initials are SANA. It's SANA.SY. This is the official website that has a different cup of tea. If I don't want to say this is the truth, it's a different truth if they think that they have the truth. It's also very hard to get. This is the place where you are free to get whatever you want. When you speak about democracy, freedom of speech, and you have some websites, because they're not speaking in the same language, and they are really outnumbered when you look at the other, or the amount of websites and TV channels directed to say the same story. I can say something that is still here and is still accessible, which is our statement at the UN. The statement where we try to condense, we try to say as much as we can, actually, as I said, in a very short time. And it might not give the whole story, but it can give some part of the story. Our statements, and by the way, if you go to the website of the UN.org and search Syria, we sent to all member states and we asked those letters. We asked those letters to be circulated to everybody as an official document of the UN, and it will be in the history of the UN for a long, long time. Over 100 letters since the beginning, explaining everything. We have this. It's on the website of the UN, all official languages of the UN. It's right there. We provided the UN with everything. We did on Friday, provided the UN with the names of 108 terrorists who were arrested in Syria, committing terrorist activities in Syria. This is our side of the story that we are trying our best. Hopefully that now we have some channels and we have some people like you who's digging and want to see the truth of what's happening in Syria. I have a question for our allies in the region, and Russia and China. It's in the region, definitely it's no secret that we have Iran is standing by us, and not because Syria is they like them and they get together, they get along together, because they have been. It's obvious for them. It's obvious for everyone who can think that Syria is under a very harsh campaign politically from an information point of view, and hopefully not militarily now. But it's definitely the armed flows, definitely the terrorism that's been exported to Syria it's a great concern. As for Russia and China, I think they are. It is the time. It is the time to for the what they call themselves the international community. Sometimes my ambassador say that when you have a community, that means that you take care of every member of the community. So not you have a double standard for any member of this community. So I have a reservation. We have a reservation in this word community. But when Russia and China as a permanent member of the Security Council, I think it is time to stop those policies of intervening in other countries, those policies that runs counter the charter of the UN that we all abide with. I'm sorry. So I think what Russia and China wanted to give is to give another understanding of what's going on in Syria. They have warned since the beginning that what is going on in Syria is not purely what they wanted to let everybody understand, that this is the situation. We have to, what they wanted right from the beginning, if you look at it from, now, if we look back at what happened, they had this series of countries. So, and they had this cross, let's have Egypt crossed, Tunisia crossed, Libya crossed. They want to continue. What everybody wanted to do is, yes, we had Libya, it's 2 resolutions, one after the other. We arm the opposition, have a resolution, no-fly zone. You adopt the resolution, an hour after the airplanes start bombard Libya. That's it. 1, 2, 3. This is the plan that they wanted to implement in Syria. The same plan. So they thought that this is the same plan that they can go to Syria. And from Syria, they move to another place. I don't know where.
Iran.
This, I don't know. But,
Iran, Russia, China.
This is what they wanted. I'm pretty sure, and we are a country where we all live together. So please, let's be clear. We are not. We're coming from a deep-rooted civilization. We don't label a people of a country in one label. We know who is with us and who is against us. We know that the United States are not the same. We know that any other country, not everybody are the same. We don't label countries. It's really easy to label a country with one accusation, with one stereotype that Syria is like this, Iran is like this, Venezuela is like this. This is really simple. And this is what they are trying to do. They're trying to label all of these countries with one label so you can, take it and that's it. Don't dig down. That's it. This is the label. As for our friend from Venezuela, when he said something about the 3,000 Al-Qaeda, I didn't want to go into any details. We know that 3,000, it's been in the news, 3,000 Al-Qaeda members ready to get into Syria. We have people from all nationalities fighting in Syria now, unfortunately. They are fighting for following some goals from their masters. Each group has its own master who pays, and they can package this mission in many different ways. They can package it with money, they can package it with religious belief, they can package it with sectarian belief, you name it. But the ultimate goal is to destroy Syria. This is the ultimate goal, is to destroy Syria. And I can assure you that this is not democracy. Democracy, if you go to the ballot box, so we say all the time, and the president said, and everybody said, if we have an election and the president does not win, he will leave. It's not like this. But I think it is a responsibility of the president or of any government not to leave. Now, you cannot leave the country and leave it to whom? To those groups. Nobody knows those groups. I've been asked, for the opposition, there are many. It's really complicated. At the beginning, there is an opposition inside Syria, and they are against the government, fighting inside Syria politically, and they want to gain their own. They want to put their own beliefs. And we have the vice prime minister is from the opposition. We have created a new ministry for conciliation. And the minister for this ministry is from the opposition. They are part of the government now. So this part, they are more than welcome. Anybody who is not with the violence, he is welcome to come and we can sit and talk. And there's another part of the government who opt for violence. We know that people can get advantage of their whatever need, whatever beliefs, but also for those people who hold the arms and they didn't commit any crime. The government also said, you are more than welcome. We will have a pardon for everybody. Surrender your arms and you're more than welcome. You're not going to be jailed, not even for one day. But if you go from one place to another, kill people, nobody is giving the information about the numbers of military personnel who've been killed. So who killed those people? There are thousands of people who were killed on a checkpoint, on their base. You know that in Syria we have a mandatory draft. Any person, any male who is 18, he has to go to military service. Can be my brother, can be anybody's brother, and he's on duty. They blow him up. So who is killing those people? Why they were killed? The amount how can you launch a missile against an airplane and you say you are peaceful? Who gave you this missile? This is a lot of questions, and nobody wanted to answer. Nobody at the beginning they wanted a swap change, a swap destruction of Syria. Now everybody is talking about what's going on in Syria. Now they are talking about, yes, we have terrorists in Syria. Now, yes, we have intervention in Syria. Why? Because if they wanted to do, it has been since the beginning, but if they had implemented fully their plan, nobody would have noticed that. You would have a failed state. You would have a state devastated and destructed and not tolerated at all with anybody. Thank you very much for your question. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, Dr. Adi. We'll next give the floor to Lizzy Phelan. My apologies, Lizzy Phelan.
I'm just going to be really short because you must be all really tired. About what we can do here, I mean, I think a lot of people have answered that, and probably people like Larry are much better placed to talk about that, especially because I'm not too familiar with the political situation in the US on an anti-war level, although it's probably very similar to the UK. But one of the things I think is really important to highlight in the anti-war movement from a media point of view is that, as Dr. Adi said, that, you know, obviously Syrian sources of information are being constantly shut down and under attack. Obviously, Press TV, the Iranian English language channel, has been taken off the air in Europe this week under the sanctions, and it was taken off the air in England in January because of a decision by the British Broadcasting Authority. But on top of that also, you know, there are many journalists, Syrian journalists in Syria, whose lives are in great danger. Of course, our colleague in Press TV was assassinated some weeks ago, Mazen, and I have contact with many journalists in Syria, including the other workers in the Damascus office, and they're constantly being threatened with death threats, etc. So we also have to constantly highlight that not only are we being, is the information that we're receiving from the Western corporate media being distorted, but those who are getting out the truth are being, you know, their lives are literally on the line. And the other thing that I think that we can possibly do, although I wouldn't, you know, I wouldn't necessarily advocate it, it depends what kind of position people are in to do. But I know that, for example, in Libya, if it wouldn't have been for delegations like Cynthia McKinney's Dignity delegation, then a lot of the information, the very little information, truthful information that was coming out of Libya, a lot of it was from non-Libyan sources, because unfortunately, of course, we often only listen to Western sources of information, and also there is language barriers, etc. But a lot of the information, the truth that came out from what was happening in Libya was from Cynthia McKinney's Dignity delegation, and I think that Larry talked about internationalism, and you know there is very little internationalism going on in the world today. And I think that solidarity delegations, peacekeeping delegations, are a very effective way of getting information out about what is really happening. And I know there's been a couple of delegations to Syria, but there haven't been many. But that's perhaps something to think about. And that's all. Thank you all very much.